Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 29 of Dirtmasters, the review series for the real rally cars of Gran Turismo 6. And in this episode we're featuring what is the least powerful rally car in the game. It's the 1969 Nissan Bluebird Rally Car. But even though it is the least powerful, it still has over 300 horsepower. It's a rear-wheel drive rally car, and it is of course a classic rally car, so it kind of has its own little niche within the rally category on Gran Turismo. So let's find out how it compares to the other classic and modern rally cars of Gran Turismo 6. Now, as we said in the intro, the Bluebird is the least powerful rally car in the game, so obviously, considering that the ratings that I give these cars are based on how they compare to each other, it is going to get some lower ratings than many of the other rally cars. For acceleration, for instance, it achieves a 2 out of 5, and although I'd love to give it more than that, that is just how it compares to the other cars. Now, for low speed handling, it does achieve a strong 5, and that's probably not too surprising because it's a small, lightweight car. Overall, for city tracks, I'm going to give it a 3, because it actually doesn't fall that far behind some of the much more powerful rally cars, and it does perform very well on city tracks. The brakes aren't as good as I would have thought though. Now, I'm giving them a 4 out of 5, but I was expecting them to be really, really good, and the brakes, all things considered, aren't as good as I was expecting. So now let's see how it handles a country track. Now, obviously this country track does provide more occasions to use your top-end performance, and again, the Bluebird does fall behind the more modern and more powerful rally cars, which isn't surprising considering its power and also its age, but primarily its power. So for top-end performance, again, I'm going to have to give it a 2, because it's just not on the same level as even the most basic of modern WRC cars. For high-speed handling though, again, I am going to give it a strong 5, because the handling on the Bluebird is, not surprisingly, very, very good. And that is actually partially due to its power output, which is enough to make it quick, but not so much that it's difficult to handle. Now, for country tracks overall, I'm actually going to give it a 4 out of 5, which may be surprisingly high for this car considering its straight-line performance. But the advantage of cars like this is, although they're not as quick, you can sometimes maintain a higher speed because of just how nimble they are. So now let's see how it handles a dirt track. Now, the problem, of course, with most of the older generation rally cars that feature on the game, not just the Bluebird but also the classic Lancer and of course the Lancia Stratos and also the Nissan 240 RS, is that they are rear-wheel drive. Now, I'm not saying that rear-wheel drive is necessarily awful, but the fact is that you just cannot get as much of your power down on a dirt track with rear-wheel drive as you can with all-wheel drive, and that is an issue for the Bluebird, because with a car like the Bluebird, which already has a power disadvantage, you just can't afford to waste even more of that power through lack of grip. And unfortunately, the rear-wheel drive that this car has does mean that it does waste time wheel spinning, when if it was all-wheel drive, I think the lap time would be probably at least 15 seconds quicker, if not more. Because as it is, this Bluebird falls around half a minute behind the top times of this series. It's around the 2-minute 30 mark around this track, whereas the top times are around 1-minute 59 or less. So obviously against the more modern stuff, this car doesn't stand a chance. But for its PP level, for its power level, and for just the vehicle type in general, it is pretty competitive against vehicles at that level. The problem is that there aren't many vehicles at that level that are already rally cars. So really, the only cars that this car is really competitive against are the classic Lancer rally car and road cars, really. In rallying, its range of effectiveness is very limited compared to the range of far better to be brutally honest, rally cars that you can get. So for dirt tracks overall, unfortunately I'm going to have to give it a 2 because it's just not that great. It's not awful, but it does fall far behind. So let's see if it can do any better than that on a snow track. Now on snow tracks, the Bluebird does actually make up for its disadvantage on dirt tracks. And on snow tracks it's actually a very good little car. The compact nature of the car makes it very, very good for high-speed manoeuvrability, and although the rear-wheel drive is a disadvantage on dirt tracks, on snow tracks that's not really the case, because on snow tracks you never slow down as much as you do on a dirt track. With a snow track it's more about keeping up your average speed and that flow through corners, and that is what the Bluebird is very good at. So for dirt tracks I'm actually going to give this car a 4, which is again surprisingly high for a vehicle that's so much slower in a straight line and on dirt tracks, but it really does perform well on this track. For drivability as well, I'm giving it a strong 5 because unsurprisingly it's not a difficult car to get a hold of. It's very forgiving, very easy to drive. It's perfect for beginners, both because of its low price and also because it's much more manageable amount of power when compared to the more modern stuff. And overall it's definitely not a bad car. It does fall behind in some occasions, but for what it's good at, it is good at those things. So now let's go back to the garage for a roundup of its best and worst points. Overall then, it's kind of unfair to compare cars like the Bluebird and the classic Lancer rally car to the more modern WRCs, but for the sake of the series that is how I've been rating all of the cars, so to suddenly change that for this one wouldn't really make much sense, because the way that I rate these cars is not against a perfect standard. The way that I rate them is against each other, and against each other this car does score lower than most. Now its overall rating is still a respectable 3.6 out of 5, which, considering its disadvantage in sheer power and straight line performance, is still not a bad overall result. Now as far as its best point, I'd say the best point about the Bluebird is a fairly obvious one, but that is just how beginner friendly the car is. If you have little experience with rally vehicles, it is a great way of learning to drive rally vehicles. But at the same time, because of having rear-wheel drive, it does actually have an interesting twist on being a beginner favourite car. And that is, not only is it a good way of introducing you to rally cars, but it's actually also more challenging to drive than you would think, especially on dirt tracks. But the advantage of that is it means that if you do choose to use this as a beginner's car, it will actually teach you a lot more than you think it's teaching you about rally driving. Because at the end of the day, if you can get this car around a rally track quickly, you'll be able to get any rally car around a track quickly. Because this car is not the easiest to drive of rally cars, and it's definitely not the best handling, although it is very good handling. As far as its worst point, well, its worst point in comparison to the other cars of the series would obviously just be its sheer straight line performance, in which it obviously does fall behind. But overall it's a very nice little car, it's fun to drive, it looks pretty cool, and it's 125,000 credits, which is a lot cheaper than many of the other rally cars. As far as who I'd recommend it to though, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to someone who's looking for a good all-round rally machine, because it's just not quick enough for that. I'd recommend it primarily for specifically people who are enthusiasts of small or classic rally cars, and for people who prefer just rallying for fun rather than necessarily being as fast as possible or winning. So overall, a respectable result for a car with so many seeming disadvantages. And as always, I'll put its specs, ratings and lap times in the video description below for you to compare it to the other cars of the series if you need to. And that's it for this episode, so I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.